the power of being uncarved. Zen wisdom for deep stillness. There is a cold, heavy spreading ache that has settled directly across your outer shoulders and the back of your neck tonight. A silent, dragging weight that feels like the slow, quiet collapse of a tower you have spent your entire life trying to build. It is the crushing sorrow of unfulfilled potential, the quiet, bitter grief of comparing your simple, modest present with the grand, soaring ambitions of your youth. You lie in the dark, and your mind repeats a painful circular comparison, measuring your quiet, unremarkable life against the brilliant, towering achievements of those who seem to have left a permanent mark upon the world. You feel as though you are a rough, forgotten stone left lying flat in the weeds, while others have been carved into magnificent pillars that reach up to touch the sky. Let the heavy, exhausting demand for significance dissolve into the cool, shadowed air of this evening tonight. Your room is filled with a soft, comforting warmth, smelling of dry oak kindling, toasted barley, and the deep, earthy scent of a low-ceilinged mountain kitchen. The mattress beneath you is incredibly solid and grounded, like the broad, flat clay floor of an old temple pantry, where the winter supplies are kept safe from the wind. Near your bed, a simple, unadorned stone hearth rests on the earth, holding a few glowing amber embers that radiate a steady, silent heat through the dark room. Outside, a soft, hypnotic breeze is moving through the quiet courtyard, causing the dried lavender and sweet clover hanging from the low wooden eaves to release their gentle fragrance. A slow, soothing scent that invites your tensed neck to soften. In this peaceful space, there is no high monument you must build before morning, and there is no audience waiting to evaluate the scale of your life. Your quiet path is not a failed draft, and your simple, ordinary existence is not a sign of a ruined destiny. Tonight, your spirit is not required to tower over the landscape, and we are not going to force your tensed body to rise. You are entirely safe in your rough, uncarved state, and no grand designs will be demanded of your stone tonight. Maybe you have felt this too, when you look at your daily routines and a sudden, sharp wave of inadequacy makes your entire chest feel tensed and empty. You feel an urgent, frantic need to accomplish more, to push your body past its limits, and to constantly prove your worth by constructing a life that looks impressive from a distance. You carry the heavy, invisible burden of this constant striving, squeezing your muscles tightly, terrified that if you let yourself rest as a simple, ordinary human being, you will disappear into absolute insignificance. This constant effort to be extraordinary is deeply tiring. It is like a rough slab of granite trying to stretch itself upward, straining its fibers to become a soaring temple pillar until its base begins to crack under the unnatural pressure. There is a surprising, quiet paradox in this state of unfulfilled ambition. We look at our modest, simple days and we treat them as a shameful mistake, a cold proof that we have wasted the raw material of our lives. We believe that if our names are not written on the high archways of the city, we are fundamentally incomplete. But the ancient wisdom of the hearth tells us that the flat, uncarved stone is not a failure. The rough granite that rests directly on the earth is not a ruined pillar. The lowliness of the hearth is its natural, most supportive state. By refusing to strain upward into a fragile column, your life is holding a sacred, silent capacity to ground and warm the world. The simplicity of your days is not an empty void of achievement, but the fertile, warm center of life itself. The friction you feel tonight is not your lack of potential, but the tight, defensive grip of your own mind trying to force a towering shape onto a stone that was meant to hold the fire. We spend our lives wanting to be seen from afar, believing that only the highest structures are worthy of love. We treat our drive for significance as a protective shield, hoping that if we can just build a great enough monument, we will finally be safe from the vulnerability of being ordinary. But this constant, frantic reaching is what makes your shoulders so cold and your neck so tight in the quiet hours of the evening. Tonight, there is no need to justify your simple path, or to find a way to make your life look grand before you are allowed to close your eyes. For these next few hours, we are simply going to let your tensed muscles sink. We are going to allow your rough stone to lie flat on the cool earth, letting the steady, quiet heat of the hearth warm your core. Without any pressure to rise and without any force. Let your breath move in a slow, circular tide. Feel the air enter your throat like the warm, soft steam rising from an old iron cooking pot. Let the breath go out like the quiet settling of ash in a silent fireplace. Each breath is a gentle release, a quiet reminder that your simple presence is entirely enough. You do not have to reach for the sky tonight. You do not have to maintain the posture of being successful, or pretend that you are satisfied with a climb you did not want. You can simply be a rough, heavy hearth stone, resting on the earth, letting the dark wash over your surface without finding anything to correct. As your mind begins to settle, we can prepare to enter a quiet, smoky kitchen where these old sorrows are held with absolute warmth. We are going to listen to the story of a young novice monk who believed he was wasted among the radishes and the wood smoke, and who was shown a rough, blackened hearth stone by an old cook, only to find that the truest warmth of the temple lived in the very place he was trying to run away from. Let your thoughts soften, let your body sink, and let the quiet, unhurried current of the night carry you forward. Let us slide quietly past the tall, grand gates of the main hall, leaving the high stone courtyards where the proud, decorated structures stand in the cold moonlight. We follow a narrow dirt path that winds behind the wooden dormitories, descending slowly toward the low-ceilinged kitchen where the air is warm and heavy with the scent of toasted barley, steamed radishes, and damp earth. It is a quiet, neglected corner of the temple grounds, a place where the grandeur of the mountain monastery dissolves into the simple, rhythmic labor of daily survival. In this dark, smoky room, a young novice monk named Kaji spent his winter months in a state of quiet, burning resentment. Kaji had entered the monastic life with a heart full of soaring, brilliant ambitions. He had imagined himself sitting in the great study hall, his eyes tracing the elegant characters of the ancient sutras under the warm light of the gilded brass lanterns, or perhaps working alongside the master carvers who were shaping the magnificent stone lotus pillars for the new meditation pavilion. He had wanted to create something beautiful, something grand and lasting that would be seen by the pilgrims who climbed the thousands of stone steps from the valley below. Instead, because his hands were deemed too clumsy for the library and his spirit too restless for the quiet study benches, the abbot had assigned him to the kitchen. Kaji was given the heavy, greasy tasks that no one else wanted to perform. His days began in the freezing dark, long before the morning bell echoed through the ravine. He spent his hours splitting heavy logs of damp oak, carrying heavy buckets of well water that sloshed against his bare shins, and scrubbing the thick, sticky black soot from the undersides of the massive iron cooking pots. As he worked, a cold, dragging ache settled directly across his outer shoulders and the back of his neck. He felt like a complete failure, a forgotten piece of rough stone left to rot in the dirt, while his peers were being carved into graceful pillars of wisdom. Every time he looked up at the main temple ridge and saw the soaring roofs of the great halls, a bitter wave of envy would tighten his chest, and he would squeeze the wooden handle of his scrubbing brush until his fingers ached with a dull, helpless heat. The only other constant presence in this dark kitchen was Sister Myorin, the elderly temple cook. Myorin was a silent, slow-moving woman who had spent 40 years preparing the simple barley and radish stews that sustained the community. Her face was lined with deep, peaceful creases, and her hands were rough and dark like the bark of an old cedar tree. She moved through the smoky room with a slow, heavy limp in her left leg, yet her simple movements carried an incredible, effortless grace. She never spoke of the scriptures, and she never joined the debates in the courtyard. She simply tended the fires and stirred the iron pots, her breathing matching the slow, steady rise of the steam. One freezing evening, when the mountain wind was rattling the heavy wooden door of the kitchen, Kaji sat on a low three-legged stool by the dying fire. He was completely exhausted, his hands stained dark with soot and his shoulders hunched forward in deep, silent misery. He had spent the entire afternoon lifting heavy sacks of grain, and he felt as though his life was sliding into absolute, unremarkable insignificance. He was ready to pack his few belongings and leave the mountain forever, believing that his potential was being wasted in the smoke. Sister Myorin approached the fireplace, her slow, limping steps making the old floorboards creak gently in the quiet room. She was carrying a small, dry bundle of sweet mountain clover, tied with a simple piece of split willow bark. She did not offer him words of comfort, and she did not tell him to be patient with his labor. Instead, she laid the sweet clover on the corner of the heavy hearthstone that sat directly on the earth beneath the massive blackened iron cooking pot. The hearthstone was a broad, flat slab of dark mountain granite, completely unpolished and rough at the edges. It sat low in the dirt floor, its surface blackened by the soot of 40 winters and scarred by the heat of countless pinewood fires. It had no elegant patterns carved into its sides, and it was completely invisible to the visiting pilgrims who gathered in the grand halls above. It was a heavy, silent, and unremarkable block of stone, resting flat on the damp ground. Mayorin looked at the young novice, her dark eyes catching the warm, low glow of the remaining embers. She pointed her rough finger toward the heavy granite slab beneath the pot. She asked Kaji if he believed the hearthstone was a failure because it had never been carved into a soaring temple pillar, and because it had spent its entire life lying flat in the soot of the kitchen floor. Kaji looked down at his dirty feet, his voice tight with a cold, quiet frustration. He replied that the stone was indeed forgotten. He said it was a rough, ugly thing that would never be seen by the world, and that its only purpose was to be stepped on and covered in ash. He believed that to be left flat in the dirt was the worst fate that could belong to any stone, and that the grand carved pillars in the meditation hall were the only ones that carried any true value. Sister Mayorin did not argue with him. Instead, she reached down with her bare, weathered hand and placed it flat on the rough, soot-covered granite of the hearthstone. Directly beside the glowing coals, she held it there for a long moment, without any sign of pain and without any rush. She then looked at Kaji and nodded, inviting him to do the same. Kaji hesitated, but he reached out his hand and pressed his palm against the dark, rough surface of the granite. He expected the stone to feel cold and hard like the mountain cliffs outside, or sharp like the tools of the carvers. But as his skin touched the soot-covered granite, a sudden, deep warmth flooded his hand. The stone was not cold at all. It held an incredible, silent, and steady heat, a deep reservoir of warmth that it had absorbed from the wood fire throughout the long day. It was radiating that quiet heat upward into the iron pot, keeping the simple barley stew warm for the hungry monks who were returning from the freezing fields. Mayorin looked at him, her voice like the soft rustle of dry leaves in the corner of the room. She explained that the builders of the temple had searched the mountain for weeks to find the stones that could become the soaring pillars of the meditation hall. But she said they had also searched with the same care to find the stone that could become the hearth. She told him that the grand carved pillars had to remain cold and rigid, standing high above the crowd and carrying nothing but the heavy, dead weight of the roof beams. If you were to build a great fire at the base of a carved pillar, she said, the intense heat would quickly crack the delicate lotus patterns, and the entire pavilion would collapse into ruin. A pillar is too fragile to hold the fire. Only the rough, flat, and uncarved granite of the hearth is strong enough to lie flat on the cold earth, to receive the burning heat of the wood, and to hold the heavy iron pot that feeds the entire community. The hearthstone does not need to rise to be useful. Its very lowness is what allows it to absorb the warmth and to keep the fire from burning the wooden floor. Its beauty is not in its shape, but in its capacity to hold and distribute the heat. A sudden, profound wave of emotional recognition washed over Kaji's chest, a feeling that made the cold ache in his shoulders begin to soften. He looked at his soot-stained palms, and then at the rough, dark granite of the hearthstone. He realized that he had been treating his simple, quiet life in the kitchen as a shameful punishment, a proof of his insignificance, because he was comparing his position to the soaring heights of the pillars. He had been straining to rise, trying to force his stone to tower, when his true sacred capacity was to sit flat on the earth and hold the warmth of a simple, compassionate life. He let out a long, slow breath, a breath that felt much wider and deeper than his daily worries, letting the cold tension in his neck dissolve into the warm, smoky air of the old mountain kitchen. Let the quiet, deep warmth of that kitchen hearth settle into your chest tonight. The slow, rhythmic sound of the cold mountain wind passing beneath the heavy wooden door continues its patient song, inviting your tensed outer shoulders to sink a little deeper into your bed. The story of Kaji and the uncarved granite is a gentle mirror for the secret weight you have been carrying through your own days. When you feel the painful ache of unfulfilled potential, your immediate instinct is to treat your simple life as a tragic mistake. You look at your quiet routines, and you decide that your lack of a grand, visible monument is a proof of your failure. To protect yourself from the fear of being insignificant, you hold your entire body in a tensed, defensive posture. You tighten your neck, you brace your spine, and you constantly strain upward, hoping that if you can just climb high enough, you will finally deserve to exist. This is the natural, exhausted defense of a heart that has been taught to measure its value only by its height. We try to carve our own lives into impressive shapes, believing that to be ordinary is to be completely invisible and unloved. But the ancient wisdom of the hearth does not ask you to stop feeling your desires, or to become a cold, unfeeling block of granite, to want to build something beautiful, or to feel the sharp sting of disappointment when your plans do not unfold as you had hoped, is a normal part of your human experience. It is the simple proof that you are still awake, that your spirit is still sensitive to the world, and that you carry a real, honest depth within you. The sorrow of collapsed ambition is not a sign of ruin. It is the natural tenderness of a stone that has felt the cold frost of the mountain. The true source of our suffering is not the simplicity of our lives, but the quiet, relentless war our minds wage against our own natural shape. The original pain of an unfulfilled dream is like the cold, damp dark of the winter kitchen. It is a real, heavy chill that we cannot completely avoid. There will always be seasons where our resources are modest, times when our efforts go unnoticed by the crowd, and moments where we must simply sit with the quiet reality of our limits. This is the simple vulnerability of being human. It is the cold mountain draft that touches the stone, a natural weather that we cannot prevent, and we cannot cure through our own desperate striving. Our suffering arises when we refuse to let our stone lie flat on the earth. We look at our rough, uncarved edges, and we decide that they are a shameful defect. We stand in the middle of our simple lives, screaming at our own granite because it cannot reach the sky, and demanding that we become a towering, polished column before we are allowed to rest. We look at the grand, decorated pillars of others, and we use their heights to bruise our own chest. This is the extra weight we layer onto our own shoulders. We are trying to support a heavy roof that was never meant for us, straining our muscles to hold up a phantom structure of pride, while the quiet, real fire of our life goes completely cold beneath our tensed feet. The teachings of the hearth gently invite us to look at this struggle through a very soft, clear light. They point to the flat, dark granite that sits directly on the damp ground. The stone does not feel humiliated because it has no lotus petals carved into its sides. It does not feel defeated when the black soot covers its surface, and it does not demand that it be carried up to the high temple roof to be admired. The granite is completely content with its own heavy, supportive nature. It holds the ground, it holds the wood, and it holds the slow, steady heat of the embers, without holding on to a single drop of judgment. When you allow your tensed shoulders to soften tonight, you are not giving up on your life. You are not choosing to become a cold, empty slab of rock that is indifferent to the world. You are simply choosing to let your stone lie flat. You are letting the dry, heavy wood of your collapsed ambitions rest quietly on your surface without any pressure to rise and without any pressure to perform. This trust is not a loud, dramatic effort of the will. It is a soft, heavy yielding, like the old granite settling into the cool clay floor of the temple pantry. It is the willingness to let the cold drafts of your disappointment pass over you, without building a tight wall of self-punishment to fight them. By letting the earth carry your weight, you discover that your simplicity is not your ruin. The flat, uncarved state of your stone was never a failure of your potential. It was the very quality that made you strong enough to hold the fire. When you stop trying to force your life to tower over the landscape, the tight, dragging ache in your neck can finally begin to melt. Your shoulders can become as wide and relaxed as the heavy hearth stone. You realize that you do not have to be a magnificent pillar to be sacred. You are the very foundation that keeps the room warm, a quiet, necessary presence that holds the soup and feeds the travelers in the dark. Let your body feel the immense, weightless relief of this truth tonight. You do not have to build a great monument before you are allowed to sleep. You do not have to prove your significance to the cold night or justify your quiet path to the empty room. For these next few hours, you can simply lie here in the soft, protective darkness of this evening, letting the cool air move through your stone. The high pillars in the meditation hall are standing cold and rigid in the wind, but your hearth is warm, quiet, and completely at peace with its own lowliness. Let your breath move in its own natural circular tide. Feel the air enter your throat like the soft, warm steam rising from the iron cooking pot, carrying the gentle scent of toasted barley and sweet mountain clover deep into your lungs. Let the breath go out like the quiet settling of ash in the fireplace, a slow, heavy release that lets your tensed muscles sink deep into the sheets. You are completely safe in your uncarved state, and your rest is absolute, deep, and beautifully still in the vast, unhurried dark of the mountain. Let us slide gently now into a quiet space of deep physical listening. There is absolutely no demand for you to change the way your breath is flowing in this moment. If your neck feels stiff, or if your thoughts are still circling like sparks rising into a dark chimney, simply let them drift. There is no need to make the air clear before you are allowed to rest. You can observe the movement of your mind with a soft, neutral eye. You are simply sitting on the low wooden stool in the corner of the kitchen, watching the last orange embers settle into the gray ash. Now, if it feels right to you, you might bring your attention to the outer edges of your shoulders. Perhaps you can feel a subtle, heavy cool settling deep into your muscles. This is a very old, quiet form of protection. We brace our shoulders when we are trying to carry a great height, or when we are trying to prevent our lives from being seen as ordinary. See if you can allow your collarbones to widen gently, softening the skin across your chest. There is no need to pull your shoulders back or to force your posture to align. Just noticing the weight in your muscles is more than enough. You might imagine that the cold is slowly radiating outward, dispersing into the warm room like a quiet mist rising from a damp stone floor. From the shoulders, you can let your awareness travel slowly down your spine. Follow the quiet path of your vertebrae, letting the attention rest directly in the middle of your lower back. This is the place where we carry the heavy burden of our unfulfilled dreams. We tighten these muscles when we are striving to stand tall like a monument, or when we are trying to hold up an impressive image that feels too heavy for our frame. If you can, see if you can let this part of your body become a little heavier. Imagine the bed beneath you is like the solid, damp clay floor of the temple kitchen. The earth does not need you to stand straight to support you. It holds your frame with an ancient silent strength that asks for no effort in return. Perhaps, as you lie here, a specific thought or memory of your perceived failure will rise to the surface. It might be an old, sharp comparison, or the quiet, heavy sorrow of a path that did not lead to the summit. When these thoughts appear, you do not have to fight them to make them silent. You might gently name this pattern in your own mind, speaking to yourself with absolute gentleness. You can whisper to yourself, "This is the old attempt to carve the stone," or "This is the shoulder trying to build a tower." By giving the pattern a name, you are choosing not to step into its current. You are realizing that the anxious habit of striving is not who you are. It is just a passing wind that is rattling the heavy oak door. Now you can visualize that broad, flat granite hearth stone we found resting in the quiet shadow of the fireplace. It is massive, rough, and blackened by 40 winters of pine soot. The stone sits directly in the cool earth, held in place by its own immense weight. If it feels right, you can imagine taking the cold, dragging weight from your neck, with all its hot ambition and its silent envy. You can gently place all these heavy logs directly onto the flat, dark surface of the hearth stone. Let the rough granite carry the mass for you tonight. The stone is strong enough and wide enough to hold your heaviest failures without cracking under the heat. As the hearth stone holds your burden, let the mental image shift in its own natural way. See the small, dry bundle of sweet mountain clover resting on the corner of the granite. The dry stalks are pale green, tied with a simple piece of split willow bark. You do not have to do anything to make the clover beautiful, and you do not have to stop the fire from burning down. Watch as the glowing orange embers slowly warm the underside of the stone. The granite absorbs the heat, turning the hot, wild sparks into a steady, comforting warmth that rises slowly through its dark grain. The soot does not look like a failure as the warmth passes through it. It looks like a soft, protective shield, catching the low amber light of the dying coals. The heat rises through the stone, touching the dry bundle of sweet clover and releasing its sharp, clean fragrance into the evening air. The sweet scent drifts through the smoky room, settling gently over the rough wood of the grain bins and the dark corners of the pantry. The lowliness of the hearth is not a ruin. It is the very platform through which the simple wood fire has created a warm, nurturing shelter in the midst of the freezing winter. You can let your own spirit rest in that same quiet kitchen tonight. There is no master standing over your bed, waiting to judge the height of your achievements. You do not have to be a towering lotus pillar to keep the room warm. You can simply be the flat granite hearth, allowing the embers to warm your core, and allowing the heat to radiate naturally through your rough edges, without any struggle to rise. Gently return your focus to the physical room where you are lying. Feel the cool air on your face, carrying the quiet, earthy scent of wood smoke and damp slate. Listen to the slow, rhythmic rattling of the wooden door as the wind passes through the courtyard. The sound is steady, patient, and completely untroubled by the dark. The mattress is holding your heavy body with an absolute quiet warmth, inviting you to let go of the struggle. There is no need to resolve your doubts before you are allowed to sleep. You do not have to fix your career or prove that you are successful before the morning sun touches the hills. You can simply return to the slow, circular movement of your breath whenever you are ready. The breath is always here, moving in and out like the quiet rise of steam from the iron pot, completely free of the rules that try to shape your worth. Let your body become incredibly heavy, sinking deep into the dark support of your bed. You are like the heavy hearth stone resting on the clay floor, weathered, rough, and entirely content with your own weight. You do not have to be a soaring monument to deserve this rest. You can simply be the raw granite, resting in the dark, waiting for nothing at all. With each slow breath, feel the space inside your chest becoming wider and softer. The cold, tight plans of your mind can finally dissolve into the warm night air. You do not have to carry the weight of your ambitions tonight. You are permitted to lie here in the soft, empty dark, letting the wind move the leaves and letting your entire life rest in its own flat, beautiful reality. Perhaps, if it feels right, you can let your awareness rest in the soles of your feet. Feel the subtle warmth that has traveled all the way down from your shoulders, a slow, heavy pulse of heat that connects your body to the quiet ground. There is no trail you must walk tonight, and there is no distance you must cover before the dawn. The earth is not moving beneath you, and it does not ask you to run. You can simply let your feet rest, heavy and still, like two smooth stones that have found their permanent place in the dry soil of the kitchen garden. As you lie here, you can let the slow, hypnotic rhythm of your breathing become your only anchor. The breath flows in, cool and damp like the evening mist that clings to the north stone wall. The breath flows out, warm and slow, carrying away the last traces of the day's friction. You are not a column that must stand straight to be useful. You are the broad, heavy foundation, completely secure and beautifully at peace with the dark. There is a quiet mercy in being completely hidden from the crowd. You do not have to protect a grand reputation tonight, and you do not have to defend your simple choices to the empty room. You can let the world go on with its noisy climbs and its fragile monuments. You can simply remain here, flat, warm, and deeply rested, allowing the dark to cradle your spirit without any expectation and without any force. The deep, steady warmth of the hearth remains a quiet anchor in our awareness, as the long winter nights slowly yield to the first tentative breaths of spring. In the weeks that followed his conversation with Sister Mayorin, Kaji did not undergo a sudden, magical awakening that stripped him of all human longing. The old habit of comparison did not simply dissolve like morning frost on the terrace. On some mornings, when the mountain wind carried the distant, sweet sound of the young scholars chanting in the high study hall, he would still feel that familiar, cold constriction tightening across his outer shoulders. He would stand over the massive iron water buckets, looking at his own rough, chapped hands, and feel the quiet, heavy sorrow of his unremarkable position creeping back into his chest. Behind the low timber woodpile, where the damp earth was covered in pale green clover, lived a quiet monk named Brother Jengo. Jengo was a large, slow-moving man who spent his days splitting the heavy logs of wild oak and seasoned pine that fed the kitchen fires. He did not participate in the temple ceremonies, and he never carried the gilded brass lanterns during the evening processions. He spoke only when the fire needed feeding, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that sounded like dry granite sliding down a mountain slope. Jengo moved with a heavy rhythmic gait, his massive shoulders permanently curved from decades of carrying the forest on his back. One damp afternoon, when the fog was hanging so low that the towering temple roofs were completely swallowed by the gray sky, Kaji was sent to help Jengo stack the wet wood. The novice was in a particularly dark and restless mood. He had spent the morning watching the master stone carvers finish the magnificent lotus pedestal for the main pavilion. The pilgrims had already begun to gather, their voices rising in soft murmurs of admiration that drifted all the way down to the kitchen garden. Kaji felt a bitter, heavy frustration burning in his throat. He threw the heavy oak logs onto the pile with a sharp, tensed violence, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He told Jengo that he could no longer bear the thought of spending his youth carrying firewood, invisible to the world, while others were creating monuments that would be praised for generations. Jengo did not stop his slow, rhythmic swing of the heavy iron-splitting wedge. He let the tool fall, the sharp clink of metal meeting wood echoing through the damp ravine, before he wiped his forehead with his dusty sleeve. He did not offer Kaji any gentle platitudes about humility, and he did not tell him that his work was secretly important. Instead, Jengo reached into his heavy hemp belt and pulled out a small blackened iron cooking pot. It was an ancient, crude vessel, its bottom encrusted with a thick, rough layer of dry soot from decades of resting directly on the kitchen hearth. The bale handle was made of simple hand-forged iron, bent and slightly uneven from years of hanging over the hot pine coals. It was completely devoid of any decorative patterns, carrying no inscriptions and holding no polished luster. It was an unremarkable, ordinary pot, heavy with the oil of countless simple meals. Jengo set the blackened pot on a flat stump between them. He reached into a woven basket at his feet and pulled out a handful of dry, brown barley grains, throwing them into the empty iron vessel. He then took a small, chipped ceramic cup and poured a measure of cold well water over the grain, letting the water settle in the dark bottom of the pot. He looked at Kaji, his slow, steady eyes completely untroubled by the distant sounds of the pilgrim's praise. He asked the young novice to take the heavy iron pot and to carry it up the steep stone steps to the main temple pavilion. He told him to place the pot directly in the center of the grand meditation hall, on the polished marble floor beneath the newly carved stone lotus pillar. Kaji was confused, but he lifted the heavy, soot-encrusted vessel by its iron handle. He walked slowly up the winding mountain path, his tensed shoulders tensing further. As he approached the grand hall, he felt a deep, hot wave of embarrassment as he carried the dirty kitchen pot past the elegant, clean robes of the visiting scholars. He stepped onto the smooth, white marble floor of the pavilion, where the grand stone pillar rose majestically toward the high painted rafters. He set the blackened iron pot down at the very base of the beautifully carved column, exactly as Gengo had instructed. He stood back and watched the vessel in the grand space. The pot looked incredibly small, ugly, and completely out of place against the polished white stone. The cold marble floor offered no warmth, and the towering pillar, while magnificent, stood completely silent and rigid in its high loftiness. The cold, damp air of the hall pressed against the iron pot, and within minutes the water inside the vessel began to skim with a thin, fragile layer of ice. The dry barley remained hard, cold, and completely raw, floating uselessly in the freezing liquid. The grand hall, with all its carved beauty and its soaring heights, could not warm the grain. It could only hold the cold, dead weight of the roof. Kaji picked up the pot, his fingers freezing against the cold iron handle, and carried it back down the winding path to the dark kitchen. He set the vessel down on the broad, flat granite hearthstone, directly beside the glowing orange coals that Sister Mayorin had tended throughout the afternoon. As the heavy iron bottom touched the rough, soot-covered granite, a quiet, hissing steam began to rise from the water. the heat that the hearthstone had absorbed from the earth, and the fire began to pass steadily through the blackened iron. Within moments, the water was bubbling gently, its soft rhythmic murmur filling the dark room with a comforting, familiar music. The hard barley grains began to soften, swelling and absorbing the steady heat, until the rich, sweet scent of toasted grain drifted into the quiet corners of the pantry. Django stood by the woodpile, watching the steam rise. He told Kaji that the grand stone pillar in the hall above was beautiful to look at, but it could never feed a single hungry traveler, he said. The pillar was too cold and too far removed from the earth to hold the heat. It was designed to remain rigid and distant, standing high above the dirt, while the real nourishment of the temple occurred down in the dark, smoky kitchen on the rough hearthstone that everyone trod upon. A quiet, profound realization settled into Kaji's chest, a feeling that was much softer and deeper than his frantic desire for greatness. He looked at the blackened iron pot, and he did not reach out to wipe the soot from its bottom. He realized that his own life did not need to be carved into an impressive, towering monument to hold a sacred purpose. His very proximity to the earth, his simple daily labor in the dark room, was what allowed him to receive and distribute the true warmth of compassion. His suffering had not been caused by his simple position, but by his constant, tensed resistance to his own natural shape. He did not become a perfect monk in that moment, and his mind did not instantly stop its habit of comparing. But as he stood in the warm, smoky room, he chose to do one small, quiet thing. He did not drop his wooden splitters in anger, and he did not walk away from the woodpile. He took a long, slow breath, letting the sweet scent of the cooked barley and the dry oak wood fill his lungs. He sat down on the low three-legged stool, allowing his tensed outer shoulders to drop completely, and he simply watched the steam rise from the iron pot, choosing to rest in the quiet, uncarved reality of his own simple day. The slow, rhythmic bubbling of the barley water on the warm hearthstone continues to hum in the background of your mind, a steady and comforting sound that invites you to rest. When we look deeply into the quiet mechanics of our own internal friction, we begin to recognize a constant, invisible machinery of self-protection. We spend our entire lives trying to build an absolutely flawless, towering monument out of a world that is naturally fluid, simple, and close to the earth. We want our choices to be completely free of failure. We want our status to be highly visible, and we want our hearts to be entirely immune to the quiet ache of feeling ordinary. This is the heavy, exhausting trap of mental control. We believe that if we can just push ourselves hard enough, we can keep our fragile structures from ever looking small or insignificant. This desperate need for high significance manifests in your body as a silent, endless vigilance. You lie awake in the quiet hours of the night, replaying the old forks in the road from years ago, wishing you could rewrite your choices to make yourself look completely strong and successful. You rehearse your tomorrow, constructing elaborate achievements to protect yourself against a quietness that has not even happened yet. You look for your reflection in the eyes of others, searching their faces for a small nod of approval to prove that you are allowed to occupy space on this earth. This is the exhausting habit of treating every anxious thought as an absolute, permanent truth. We believe that if we are harsh enough with our own simple reality, we can somehow shame our raw clay into becoming a towering pillar. But Buddhist wisdom invites us to look at this internal struggle with a very soft, clear light. The teachings point to a profound distinction between the natural weather of existence and the extra layer of suffering we manufacture inside our own minds. Life will always bring its own cold impacts. There will be moments of quietness, moments where we drop something of immense value, and moments where our simple path feels drafty and cold. This is the primary pain of being human. It is the cold winter wind that passes through the cracks of the wooden kitchen door. It is a physical limit that we cannot prevent, and we cannot cure through our own worry. To understand how we turn this natural pain into a lifetime of suffering, let us look at the hearth itself. When we light a fire on the flat granite stone, the heat naturally produces a thick gray smoke from the damp pine wood. The smoke is the primary pain of the kitchen. It is a real physical presence that stings the eyes, dries the throat, and darkens the ceiling beams. The suffering, however, is not the smoke itself. The suffering is what happens when we panic at the sight of the cloud and try to trap the smoke inside the room. We run around the kitchen, trying to catch the gray mist in our bare hands. Or we seal the chimney tight because we are terrified of letting the neighbors see that our fire is producing soot because we try to control the air. The smoke has nowhere to go. It traps itself in our lungs, stinging our throats, blinding our eyes, and eventually making the entire kitchen unbreathable. We believe that by sealing the room we are protecting our home, when in truth our desperate grip is the only reason we are choking. Your mind has been trying to trap the smoke of your unfulfilled dreams with that exact, frantic rigidity. You believe that if you let go of your regret for even a second, you are condoning your failure, or proving that you do not care about your potential. You treat your grief as a permanent personal identity, wrapping yourself in your shame like a heavy, soot-encrusted garment. You become terrified of your own flat, uncarved stone, trying to build a towering column of anxiety, rather than letting the warmth move through your joints. We turn our simple presence into a silent monument of failure, writing our insignificance in stone, while we write our goodness in water. But peace does not come from finding a mountain, where the kitchen fire never produces a single cloud of smoke. True peace comes when you finally change your relationship with the air. It comes when you learn to open the wooden screens of your heart, allowing the smoke of your disappointments to rise naturally through the wide chimney of your awareness. When you let your grip soften, the gray mist does not choke your throat. It simply rises into the high rafters, drifting smoothly out into the vast night sky, and leaving the room completely clear, completely warm, and entirely ready to support the next meal. When you let go of your resistance to your simple life, you are not pretending that the old dreams did not matter. You are not telling yourself that your quiet position is a grand triumph, or that you should be indifferent to the sadness of what was left behind. You are simply choosing to let the smoke pass through the chimney of your chest. You are letting the cold draft of your regrets move through your muscles, without building a tight wall of self-judgment to fight it. You are allowing yourself to feel the real grief of your limits, without deciding that the limit is who you are. You are realizing that you are the vast, patient hearth that holds both the fire and the smoke, not the fragile column that must be kept pristine to be worthy. Let yourself feel the immense, weightless relief of this realization right now. There is absolutely no need to make your path look grand tonight. You do not have to carve your rough granite into a magnificent pillar before you are allowed to rest. You can let the old defenses drop, letting your outer shoulders sink deep into the quiet support of your bed. The winter wind is blowing over the high gorge. The kitchen fire has settled into a deep red glow, and the vast sky is completely at peace with its own boundless nature. You are allowed to be flat. You are allowed to be uncarved. You are permitted to lie here in the soft, empty dark, letting your entire life rest in its own quiet, unpolished suchness. As you sink deeper into this quiet, spacious dark, let your breath continue its slow, circular tide. Each inhalation is a cool, gentle mist that enters your wide, warm center. Each exhalation is a soft, heavy release that lets the air flow back into the boundless night. You are not a closed box, trying to protect a single, painful memory of your insignificance from the light. You are an open, weathered hearthstone, resting in the quiet sanctuary of the kitchen, completely safe and beautifully at peace with the flow of the fire. Let your body become incredibly heavy, feeling the steady pull of the earth below. The bed is holding you without asking for any performance in return. You have dropped the heavy wooden tools of your daily survival, and you have laid down the rigid plans of your tomorrow. The workshop of your mind is completely dark, and the sweet mountain clover is growing quietly under the silent stars. You can simply let the air move through your channels, waiting for nothing at all. With each slow, gentle breath, feel the space inside your throat becoming softer and more relaxed. The tight, defensive words you have been preparing all day can finally dissolve into the cool night air. You do not have to explain your path to anyone tonight. You do not have to defend your choices or prove that you are worthy of your space on this earth. You are allowed to be completely silent, completely unpolished, and completely at peace. Perhaps you can feel a quiet, settling warmth spreading from the center of your back down into your hips, your legs, and your ankles. Your body has carried so much weight, trying to support your life through a perfect, unbending design. You have held yourself in such a rigid posture, always bracing against the fear of being seen as ordinary. You can let that tight grip melt away completely now. Let your bones rest heavily on the sheets, completely empty of all burdens, empty of all plans, and empty of all guilt. There is no danger in this darkness. The old storms can no longer reach your wood, and the demands of your yesterdays are nothing more than distant, faded echoes in the ravine. You are not a project that needs to be fixed, and you are not a sculpture that must be carved into a flawless shape. You are a living, breathing landscape, vast, rugged, and entirely free to grow in your own beautiful, uncarved way. Let the slow, circular current of your breath carry you deeper into this quiet shelter. Each breath is a soft opening, a gentle swelling of the granite past the old, tensed boundaries of your mind. The work of the day is finished, the cooking pots are cold, and the kitchen is resting under the quiet stars. You are home, you are safe, and you are allowed to simply exist, without any struggle and without any force. The quiet, damp scent of the old kitchen chimney drifts slowly from the high peaks of the temple, traveling down the rocky paths until it meets the warm, flat spaces of your own modern room. We no longer split oak logs by the woodpile, and we do not scrub blackened iron pots before the morning bell. Yet we carry the exact same cold weight across our outer shoulders as we move through our hurried daily lives. You can feel this familiar tension when you sit in the quiet of your home, staring at the small, glowing screen of your phone. You check it over and over, waiting for a single text message to provide some fleeting proof of your significance. It is our modern way of trying to carve a beautiful pattern on a stone that only needs to rest. We seek a quick nod of approval from a distant observer, hoping it will make our simple, uncarved existence feel worthy of the space we occupy. At night, when the busy streets are finally quiet, your mind begins to run its old, exhausting loops of comparison. You lie awake in the dark, replaying your career paths and your past choices, turning your history over like a heavy stone you are desperately trying to lift. You look at the polished, brilliant lives of those who seem to tower so far above you, comparing your quiet, ordinary routine with their high monuments of success. You scroll through the bright images of their achievements, seeing only their grand columns and their celebrated names. You decide that your own simple life is a tragic failure, because your stone is still rough and uncarved. You wear a brave, cheerful smile during your daytime meetings, pretending to be completely satisfied, while your inner chest feels heavy and tensed with the quiet grief of feeling unremarkable. You try to paint a bright, flawless surface over your dark soot, hoping the world will not notice how low you sit in the dirt. We carry this same tensed reaching into the delicate connections we try to protect. When we care for someone, we often try to hold their lives with a white-knuckle grip, clenching our fingers around their choices like Kaji holding the iron handle of the boiling pot. We want to predict every movement and control every reaction to protect our hearts from the cold wind of uncertainty. We brace our shoulders against the natural shifts of their feelings, forgetting that a true nourishing connection needs the steady, quiet support of the hearth, not the tight force of our control. When they pull away, or when the future of our path looks unmapped and raw, a sudden panic settles behind our neck. We feel a deep burning guilt when we try to rest, believing that we must constantly produce a grand work to earn our place on the clay floor. We treat our quiet hours as a waste of material, as if we must burn ourselves to ash before we are allowed to be still. But tomorrow, when the loud demands of your routine return, you can choose to hold your day with completely different hands. You do not have to carry the cold, rigid posture of your self-judgment into every simple interaction. When a sudden challenge arises, or when you feel the heavy soot of someone's disapproval landing on your surface, you can choose to make one small, quiet shift. You can choose to pause before you react. In that brief, silent space of a single breath, you do not have to lift the heavy log or defend your ordinary shape. You can simply let your outer shoulders drop. You can allow the cold draft of the moment to pass over your granite, letting the pressure slide away without turning it into a wild, destructive spark. You are the broad hearth, completely still, and the wind has no power to change your deep, ancient grain. You can choose to look at your anxious thoughts without treating every gray cloud of worry as an absolute, permanent truth. When the old voice of insignificance starts telling you that you are falling behind, or that your simple life is a failure, you can let the thought be like the gray smoke of the pine wood. You do not have to trap it in your chest or chase it with your bare hands. You can simply open the chimney of your awareness, watching the thought rise, drift, and dissolve naturally into the wide night sky, leaving your warm, uncarved center completely quiet and completely clear. You can learn to care for your relationships without clutching their handles until your joints begin to ache. You can support the people you love by being the steady, warm foundation beneath their feet, letting them rest on your surface without demanding that they conform to your design. When your path feels foggy and raw, you can choose to sit with the flat, quiet reality of the present. You can let the heavy pot sit on your granite, trusting your own deep warmth to cook the meal in its own natural time, without needing to rise, and without needing to prove your height to the crowd. You do not have to earn your right to rest tonight. Your quietness is not a failure of your ambition, and your need for silence is not a waste of your precious life. Your body is a living, breathing landscape that requires the slow, dark seasons of the night to cool its fibers and restore its strength. You are permitted to lie here in the soft, protective darkness, letting the heavy wood of your daily survival rest flat on the earth. The high columns of the city are standing cold in the wind, but your hearth is warm, safe, and completely at peace with its own lowliness. Let your breastbone soften and widen. Feel the breath enter your chest, warm and spacious, like the steam rising from the slow cooker in a quiet kitchen. Let the breath go out, heavy and slow, carrying away the last of the day's dry tension. You are not a pillar, and you do not have to stand straight for anyone tonight. You are the broad, supportive stone, completely secure, and entirely free to rest in the dark. Let your hands rest completely empty on your sides. Your fingers can loosen their grip on the heavy tools of your daily struggle. You have laid down the wood splitters, and you have returned the heavy iron wedges to the dusty corner of the room. There is nothing you need to build before morning, and there is no pattern you must maintain to be worthy of your rest. You can simply be flat, heavy, and quiet. As you sink deeper into this peaceful shelter, let the slow circular current of your breathing carry you down. Each breath is a soft opening, a gentle settling of your weight past the old, tensed expectations of your mind. The busy streets are silent, the screens are dark, and the earth is cradling your frame with an absolute quiet warmth. You are home, you are safe, and you are allowed to sleep. The heavy wooden door of the mountain kitchen is finally bolted tight against the damp night air. The last blue flame has flickered out. The hot, wild wood sparks have settled completely, leaving only a soft bed of cool gray ash that covers the remaining embers. The long, exhausting hours of lifting firewood and carrying heavy buckets are finished for the day. Your body is settling deep into the quiet support of your bed. Feel the massive weight of your limbs, like a broad slab of uncarved granite, resting directly on the damp clay floor. There is no longer any need to brace your outer shoulders, or to keep your neck tensed to carry a high, imaginary weight. The solid earth beneath you is carrying you completely. The ground has held the weight of the mountain forests for thousands of years. It can hold your tired frame without any effort. You are permitted to stop trying to carve your own life into an impressive monument tonight. You do not have to find a way to justify your quiet path, or to prove to the dark that you are a towering success. The heavy iron-splitting wedges have been laid down. The tools of the stone carvers are resting in their leather wraps. The massive lotus pillars in the high meditation hall are standing cold and rigid in the wind. But your hearth is warm, quiet, and completely at peace. Let your breathing become incredibly slow and quiet. It moves like the warm, soft steam rising from the heavy iron pot, carrying the gentle scent of dry, sweet clover and toasted barley deep into the dark room. The steam does not struggle to climb the mountain peaks. It does not try to stand straight like a column, and it does not worry about the grand ceremonies of the temple. It simply rises, drifting smoothly through the dark rafters, and evaporating naturally into the vast night sky. With each soft breath, You can feel the cold weight across your shoulders beginning to melt away. The tensed muscles at the back of your neck are releasing their tight grip, letting your spine become wide and soft against the sheets. You are dropping the heavy soot-stained vessels of your daily survival. You are letting go of the frantic need to be extraordinary. Your stone can lie flat, completely still, and entirely safe in the dark. You have permission to let the quiet heat move directly through your core tonight. You do not have to hold yourself tensed to prevent your life from looking ordinary. Your simple presence is clean, warm, and abundant. It does not look for a towering pedestal to prove its value. It rests directly on the earth, absorbing the steady warmth of the embers, and radiating that heat naturally through your rough edges. The dark pantry is warm because of the very granite that sits low in the dirt. Sink a little deeper into the mattress now. Let your eyes remain closed, letting your focus dissolve into the smooth, black pool of the empty dark. Your face is soft. Your jaw is completely relaxed. The tight, careful thoughts that paced your mind all day have finally let go of their watch, allowing your awareness to rest as a simple hearthstone, uncarved, heavy, and completely content with its own weight. Let the slow, hypnotic rustle of the dry leaves in the courtyard carry you down into a deep sleep. The kitchen is dark, the hearth is warm, the world is quiet. You are resting in the very place where your journey began, far below the reach of the noisy crowds, and far beyond the memories of your collapsed ambitions. The high monuments have been forgotten. The great study halls are cold. The path is completely still for tonight. You do not have to solve the design of your career before the morning sun touches the ridges. You do not have to prove your significance to the night, or justify your simple days to the empty room. The darkness does not judge your rough edges. The earth does not demand that you be a soaring column to deserve its quiet support. You are allowed to be flat. You are allowed to be tired. And you are allowed to simply exist without any purpose. Let your breath go out like a quiet puff of steam rising into the chimney, leaving you completely empty and completely clean. You are not a ruined monument that must be rebuilt by your own anxiety. You are a broad, heavy foundation, resting in the quiet sanctuary of the home, completely secure and beautifully at peace with the dark. With each slow tide of your breathing, feel the quietness of the stone settling into your heart. The teaching is no longer a set of rules you must remember. It is a soft, heavy weight in your chest, a feeling of returning to the dark soil where you are already accepted. The wood is silent, the water is warm, and you are permitted to let your entire life rest exactly as it is, without any struggle and without any force. Allow your consciousness to float down like a single quiet ash falling from the grate, drifting slowly, silently, through the cool shadows until it touches the quiet earth below. There is no impact, there is no sound. There is only the quiet, warm embrace of the ground, holding your spirit with an absolute infant patience. You can let the thoughts of your tomorrow slide away like dry leaves falling from the timber pile. They are completely powerless in the dark. The night is vast, patient, and cool, offering you all the room you need to fully let go of the struggle. You are home, you are safe, and you are allowed to sleep. Let yourself sink into the soft, dark current of a dreamless rest. The mountains are asleep, the kitchen is silent, and the steady heat is moving through your granite, carrying you deeper and deeper into the quiet sanctuary of the earth, where you are completely free, completely held, and beautifully still. If the grand temple pillars must remain forever cold and rigid to hold up the heavy roof, why do we still wear ourselves out trying to stand tall in the freezing wind, when the low, uncarved hearthstone is the only place where the fire can truly live?